flavor podcast, where we go behind the scenes in the cheese world to chat with the people making, selling, or distributing your favorite specialty food products. I'm your host, Janae Muha, certified cheese professional, longtime cheesemonger, and producer advocate. We're starting with big stuff right away this year on the podcast with the one and only Andy Hatch from Uplands Cheese in Dodgeville, Wisconsin. Andy is widely celebrated as being one of the best cheesemakers in the country, with his cheese, Pleasant Ridge Reserve, being one of the most awarded cheeses in the United States. His cheesemaking model differs from many makers by being totally seasonal and pasture-based, so it stands as a blueprint for sustainable agriculture. Grab a beverage and settle in as Andy walks us through his life in cheese, what the last 2 years have looked like for him, what keeps him inspired, and industry movements he's keeping his eye on. So let's start with introducing yourself. And I actually want to know about your path to cheese. Like, how did you even become a cheesemaker to begin with? So how did all of that start?
Okay. Well, first things first, I'm Andy Hatch. I'm the owner and cheesemaker of Uplands Cheese in Dodgeville, Wisconsin. And second things second, cheese making, I came into it sort of secondarily. I wasn't born into it, which is unusual in Wisconsin. Most of the businesses here are, family legacy businesses on the farming side and the cheese making side. And my parents didn't milk cows or make cheese. My father's a lawyer, my mother's a milliner, and I was raised in the eastern side of the state above Milwaukee on Lake Michigan, and had kind of I grew up in town and had like a town kids pastoral fantasy as a teenager, and went to school, UW-Madison, for dairy science, and thought I wanted to milk cows. And I had kind of I wasn't going to inherit a farm. And so I was working on farms, and, as a 20-year-old, realizing like, this is not going to be easy. And I thought instead that maybe I'd have an academic career in agriculture. So I started working for a corn breeder, and got interested. I like making things with my hands, but I like lab work and I like learning. And I thought, well, maybe this is more realistic. The corn breeder, the guy in Wisconsin, Walter Goldstein, had married a Norwegian woman from a cheesemaking family. And while I was working for Walter, his elderly father-in-law died back in Norway and left his mother-in-law, this little old Norwegian woman named Uni, kind of alone on the side of a fjord on this farm. And, they were trying to figure out how to help her. And me being like a little, 22-year-old was like, ooh, send me. So they sent me over to Norway to help Uni. And that was the first cheese making I did, was milking goats, making goat cheese on the side of this fjord. And so romantic, yes, spectacular scenery, wonderful woman, really interesting cheese. It ticked all those boxes, but it also for me clicked in that it kind of married my fascination with learning and tinkering in a lab-like setting with actually, making things with your hands and being outside. And then the second important way it clicked in the bigger sense is that I could see that back home it was, well, I didn't see this at that point, but I could see in general that it was a way for a kid like me to get into farming, because, changes the financial dimension of it, adding value to that milk. Now, instead of trying to sell a commodity, you're selling something, over which you can control the price. And so I kind of fell in love with it then, and I spent a couple of years at that point in Europe. I stayed over there for several years and had not intended to come back. I was fairly settled in Germany and got the phone call out of the movies, your father's gonna die, get on the next plane home. So I rushed home and he didn't die, but I felt like I needed to stay closer to home, help him recover, and that's when I met Caitlin, and that's when I met the Gingriches here at Uplands. And so you have to have a license to be a cheesemaker in Wisconsin, only state that requires it. And so they put you through your paces. You have to take classes, serve apprenticeship hours, and ultimately take a test. And I worked for a couple of different cheesemakers around Wisconsin, and Uplands was the last apprenticeship I did. And I'm still here, sitting in the same office 15 years, 16 years later.
I love that. I've actually never heard that entire story, and I've read like a ton of articles about you. So I love that you just ran off to Norway to go make cheese. That's wonderful.
I don't tell that. That's the long version. You got the deep cut. I don't usually tell that story. I don't know. It's alternatingly. Sometimes it seems boring. Sometimes it seems a little too fanciful. But
I'm all for fanciful.
Yeah.
Like I feel like the way that people get into cheese is kind of fanciful a lot. So it is kind of a nice. I don't know. I like it. I think it's fun.
Oh, romance matters. I mean, if you fall in love with something, you remember why. And but I do have to say, I love where I am, southern Wisconsin. I'm not sure there's anywhere else in the world I'd rather be making cheese. I went to Europe with a friend, and he stayed, and so it's been interesting to watch. We had originally intended to come back here, to farm together, either over there or here, and he fell in love with an Austrian girl. He's still farming in Austria. But the things that I've been able to accomplish here, not that I'm sitting on top of a mountain or anything, but to be able to buy a farm and a cheese business, he can't do that in Austria. It's too difficult, too expensive over there to just kind of show up as an apprentice and work your way in to ownership.
Right.
I appreciate that about where I am, and it's also a lot of fun being a cheesemaker in Wisconsin.
So let's talk about that though. If working with the Gingriches obviously made an impression on you, what was it about Uplands that made you want to stay and kind of take over when they decided to retire?
To begin with, it's a dairy farm and a cheese business, and I wanted to do both. I think it's the most interesting way, the most appealing way to make cheese, and then also, I wanted to live and raise my family on a dairy farm. That's probably the most important basic criteria. I love the area. So we're in as you know, southwest part of the state. I grew up in this kind of southeast part of the state, different. So I'm not where I grew up, which sometimes I regret, but I'm close enough. And I love this corner of the state. And it was an interesting question. Beyond that, it was we spent years talking about going to the bank and trying to borrow a lot of money to buy an existing business, or scraping together our nickels and dimes and trying to start from scratch by ourselves on a shoestring. And pros and cons to both approaches. I honestly, it's a lot harder to go from 0 to 1 than it is to go from 1 to 2. And I think I'm better suited, Caitlin as well, better suited to growing something and refining it and improving it than starting from scratch. Yeah, we were tempted in either way, and ultimately the timing here was lucky, and we had a local bank that was willing to take a chance on us. We didn't show up with any money. We didn't have family money or, angel investors or anything. So we really had to convince the local bankers to, make a character loan, take a chance on us. And I actually just now was in the office of that same banker just this afternoon, buying another piece of property next door. Not a big one. I mean, we're not sitting on top of a mountain or a gold mine or anything, but we're paying that guy's trust back. We just gave him another loan. So the circumstances here were lucky timing wise, and with the Gingriches and Patnods, and then also with meeting Scott and Liana, who, as you know, we own the farm together with and run it together with. So lucky. And then, there's been luck laced all the way through the 20-year history of Uplands. And it seemed like walking away from it to try to start something else, when really I would just try to replicate what they had here, more or less, seemed redundant and wasteful.
It may not be much of a mountain, but I think it's a pretty big mountain for the driftless region, what you're sitting on.
Rich top. No.
It's no Pacific Northwest mountain, but it's definitely something to get up there.
Yeah, this time of year, it feels like it. I mean, there's nothing higher for 25 miles to the north and west, and we take that winter wind right in the face.
Yeah. And are the cows still out on the pasture? You keep them out all year round, right?
Yes, they're out all year round, and they look great. They love this. It's 25 out right now. It's one wonderful cow weather. They put on a thicker coat in the winter, and they're pregnant, so they're eating more, and they eat a little more even to stay warm. And they're still being rotated through pastures, mostly, to distribute fertility. But the ground's frozen, and so you can, move them according to where you need to put fertility, but also get them out of the wind if there's a storm, get them into the trees, that kind of thing. So yeah, they stay somewhat active, but we're all kind of on vacation time now. It's like, we don't go get them till 8 a.m. Sometimes we don't go get them till 9 a.m. And it's like, we have a second cup of coffee. They, lie around a little more. Everybody enjoys the break. But they had a good year. They worked hard this year. They were grazing until mid-December again, just like last year. It was a remarkable season.
That's pretty wild. Well, let's talk about the last 2 years, since your business model is a little bit different than a lot of other cheesemakers with being completely seasonal. How has COVID kind of affected how you do business, and how has anything changed in that respect?
Well, the core of our business hasn't changed, and that looked lucky or fortuitous or smart. Our supply chain is so tight. It's just, our own cows, pastures, we buy in some grain, and then cultures rent it salt. So, production wise, and we had a couple of good grazing seasons, thank God. I mean, to layer a drought or something on top of all this would have been really painful. Present Northwestern Company acknowledged. I really feel for the farmers out there. So production wise, we had a good couple of years. Cows milked really well. Pastures were in great shape. That end of things didn't change all that much. Sales wise, and I think I'm probably repeating myself from when we talked last year. We saw what almost everybody saw. Restaurants dropped away, independent cheese shops were all over the place, depending, I think, did they have parking? Did they have good takeout, mail order, prepared food? All over the place. And some of the grocery stores, Whole Foods did really well. And our website, which has never been something we've put a lot of energy into, it's been kind of incidental, picked up. So I think that was the normal pattern, right, for a lot of people. And we rode the wave and ended up in decent shape both last year and again this year. So, no major disruptions on the production side. Sales were skewed, but the net was good. We sold all the cheese we made, which is all we can do, so it felt satisfactory, nervy, obviously, and we came through on paper in pretty good shape. We took some more scars this year, just personnel wise. It was a really difficult year. A lot of family health issues, employee health issues. So it was exhausting in that way, but the business has held together pretty well. And so, again, luck. I'll take it when I can get it. So number one, some luck. Number two, I think, I don't want to sound smug about it, but having a tight little supply chain, there are times when it looks good, and I think we've benefited from that. Number three, we have a really good group of employees. There are only about half a dozen of them, but rock solid, stayed with us the whole time, stayed committed to each other in terms of trying to keep each other safe. And so, and then as far as customers, our customers supported us. Those who were in a position to buy and sell a lot of cheese did it. So yeah, all of that made me feel lucky. So I think we avoided some of the worst parts of the experience for other businesses like us, which would be supply chain disruption, can't get enough employees, and their customers stop buying cheese.
I think that because of your seasonality too, like people who work there obviously know that it's a certain time of year where work is going to be happening. So I think that also helps too, that it's kind of like ingrained in the business model. Whereas a lot of places I think are having I know my husband, for one, working for a distributor, he's having a lot of issues finding people to work for them. And, it's just getting harder and harder.
You saw that headline today that in November, the country set a record for the amount of people who quit their jobs. Well, I think it was a record at least for the last couple of decades, maybe since they started keeping track.
Well, people are tired of being treated unfairly and disposable. So yeah, it's you have to start paying people and treating people well to get them to stick around. And if they do stick around, that means you're doing something really well. So Uplands makes 2 cheeses a year, and that's it. What keeps you excited and engaged to make those 2 cheeses? Like, is that something that like lives in your life, that you just like that stability, or is it just something that you've come to terms with and because most of the cheesemakers I know like to tinker and they like to make like a million new things and whatnot. And so like, if you're 15 years into this, like what is keeping you still really excited about Pleasant Ridge and Rush Creek?
Well, good question. I think particularly with seasonal raw milk cheese, but really with most cheese, certainly interesting cheese, it changes all the time. So, I'm turned on by variety and learning new things, but I find that kind of challenge and satisfaction within these 2 cheeses. They are always different. And like I said, I think that's particularly true when it's seasonal, and it's particularly true with raw milk, and it's particularly true with natural rinds. We're not making the same cheeses over and over again. We're making new cheese every time. And so, and the two cheeses themselves are so polar opposite in the kind of, well, technically, but just the mental approach, everything about them. And so, between the Pleasant Ridge season, the Rush Creek season, the holiday shipping season, and then hibernation, it's always, there's constant renewal. And, each season wears you down by the end, but the knowing that you're about to turn a corner into something new, just that change is stimulating and energizing. And so I think both of those things come into play. Number one, it's a matter of refinement, which is just a different kind of learning and self-improvement. A matter of refinement as opposed to, redesign or starting at square one every time, which I'm probably more suited to. And then number two, on an annual, our seasonality of what we do here is such that you do have change all the time. Every couple of months, your life is completely different. I think making, if we were making the two cheeses constantly side by side 12 months a year, that would be an entirely different experience. And I might go a little numb from that. It would be pretty hard to get me up right now to make Rush Creek, to be honest. Like, I've had my fill. And, I won't do it again for 10 months. But I honestly, I would, don't tell my cheeses I said this, but I would go back to one. I would get as much creative satisfaction out of one as I do two. The other thing I'll say is I can get my kicks in that way in other parts of my life, like playing music, traveling. I'm into novelty, and I'm into new things, but I don't have to satisfy every craving through cheese. It is just cheese today.
It's nuance, that's like, a lost art, I feel like these days.
And then I'll say one more thing, and don't take this as me being smug or, I'm not, saying what we do here is more important than what other cheesemakers do, or our cheese is more interesting, but the goal of what we do here is, to make world-class cheese. I mean, and if you look at people making world-class cheese, or wine for that matter, around the world, they're pretty much only doing one thing. It's not like this, my approach is novel. If you want to do something really well, you probably need to focus on it for a long, long time. Why that's not often the case in the US with artisan cheese making is an interesting question. And I don't think it's because cheesemakers here who make a lot of cheeses are misguided or, ADD or not good business people. I think the circumstances here are so different from the old world. So even just economically, in terms of being able to make a living on just one type of cheese, it's not easy to do here as a small scale cheesemaker. Whereas in Europe, if you tapped into an AOC situation, it's different. So I don't think I'm not saying we're any better than American cheesemakers who make dozens of varieties, but
I get that, because if you think about, like, in Italy, you have people who just focus on olive oil or tomatoes or whatever. There's a niche that they kind of like really define. And that's what makes them world class, is because they are been able to take that time to really find the best ways of doing it and whatnot. I guess it's a good thing that you were able to kind of step into that role already of, Uplands already being a pretty legacy cheesemaker by the time you stepped into that role.
Yeah, and I give Gingrich a lot of credit for never wavering from his vision of, a single cheese. He was here in this office hanging out like maybe a couple days before Christmas, picking up cheese, and somebody else came in to pick up cheese. It was somebody from the university, and it might have been the first time I'd ever heard Mike tell a flattering version of the story of us starting Rush Creek. And, he was kind of grumpy about it. I don't think he wanted to do it. I know he didn't. I mean, I think he had to appease his, aspiring young cheesemaker, throw him a bone. But when I bought the farm and moved into his house and was, inherited all the business files in the basement, I found his original business plan. And he, just had a single-minded focus. He basically did everything he said he was going to do in the mid-90s with this that he wrote in this business plan. And it was all, focusing everything, the breeding of the cows, the feeding of the cows, the management of the farm, focusing everything on the one cheese, which was a pretty unusual vision in Wisconsin, dairy in the late 90s. He deserves a lot of credit for that. And so when I wanted to make the second cheese, he didn't want to do it. So for the first time, I heard him tell kind of an affectionate story about it, which was amusing. But he agreed eventually. He told me, he's like, well, you can, buy some equipment, but you've got to pay it back in 1 year. Or, he made it difficult. And, but it's been good for this farm. The second cheese. It hasn't been great for my marriage, but it's an all-consuming cheese. Gosh, young cheesemakers out there, if you're listening to this, don't pick a cheese like Rush Creek.
Just takes too many hands on.
Oh yeah, and it's a lot of pieces in a short amount of time. And it's a really difficult cheese. So many things have to go exactly right for that cheese to work, and only one little thing has to go wrong, for it to wander off course.
Well, then it's hard too, because it's like right before the holidays. So you're also juggling all of those holiday orders at the same time.
Yeah, and the caves are full of Pleasant Ridge, so that work is maxed out, and it's a lot. And as you know, I mean, we have to hire half a dozen people every fall for that short burst. And I should, give a shout out to the crew this year and last year, talking about how we fared through the pandemic. I mean, not only is the core crew here all the same, people Nate and Eric and Kim and Tim, but we had incredible set of people come out last fall and again this fall, which I haven't said out loud too often. I don't want to sound smug because I know everybody else is just howling for labor. We could have maybe used one or two more, but we had great people.
Well, get that tiny house village up on the property next door, and I'll come out next year.
That's actually what I was at the bank for today. We bought that little house right down on the road, and we're gonna start a cheesemonger in residence program. Open a little farm shop down there, and
you heard it here, folks. First, new things at Uplands. So, I want to just kind of tap your brain about just trends and movements in the cheese industry, and just kind of what you think, as even though we're still solidly in a pandemic, but kind of where you see things, how you think things are going, or what you see is going to be happening?
Well, as I was kind of just explaining, I haven't really thought more than 6 inches in front of my face for the last few months. And
it is only the 4th of January, so I can't really expect that much out of you.
I haven't gotten my big thinking hat on yet. And I also haven't traveled for 2 years, but I do have a couple of thoughts. They're not that well organized, but number one is what's going to happen with pre-cuts in stores versus bulk wheels. I've got a couple of thoughts on that. And number two is, how far we can take like convenience and customer service, particularly through e-commerce. Sending out pre-cut, back-sealed cheese boards. Those are two trends I'm kind of keeping an eye on. A third one is consolidation amongst distributors. Not a new story, but that trend is not slowing down. So I'll leave it with those three. The first one, prepackaged cheese versus bulk. So obviously with the start of the pandemic, everybody wanted prepackaged cheese, and a lot of even small producers like us scrambled to make it happen. I bought my first ever vacuum sealer. Didn't end up using it much. I'm not selling prepackaged cheese, but I did find a local converter who would do it for us. I got ready to do it in case we needed it. And like I said, our sales overall held up, so I didn't feel like I had to go that route. But if we end up expanding the creamery, which we probably need to do soon, and need to find new avenues to sell more cheese, will we explore that? So like I said, my dad was a lawyer. I always have two opposing thoughts in my head. On the one hand, I've become convinced doing our own trials with vacuum sealing Pleasant Ridge that it can be better for the cheese than hand wrapping it in plastic. I think there are advantages there, and I think there are advantages for food safety and proper labeling and shelf life. And I sometimes, when I'm down that train of thought, I think to myself, I wonder if have I said this to you before? I wonder if 10 years from now we'll look back on this era and be like, remember when we used to go through all that care to raise the animals, breed them, feed them, milk them, make the cheese, age the cheese, and then we just send out whole wheels, and whoever, however, cut it up, served it, wrapped it, cared for it, didn't care for it. We're giving up all this control at the last step of this marathon of care and vertical integration and investment. And then the other, the opposing point of view is, cheeses like ours in particular, but all, high quality cheeses need mongers out there who understand them and care for them and can explain them. And that means mongers need to taste and touch and smell and think about and talk about cheese. And I didn't do a lot of retail, but I did enough. And I cut my teeth when I was young. That spell right after Norway, I spent 6 months working at Neal's Yard Dairy, and you were expected then to taste the whole slate basically every day, 70 cheeses. And I learned so much from doing that. What do we lose as an industry if we don't, if we don't have cheesemongers cutting and tasting and cheese and talking about cheese? I think we lose a lot. So those are kind of the two conflicting cheese points. And I suppose the balance that needs to be struck is, stores who have trained staff that can properly handle cheese, we need them to continue doing that. And stores that aren't going to make that investment maybe are better off taking pre-cuts. But I don't know. I mean, that's pretty simplified, maybe.
I think it's a totally valid thing to think about, though, because as someone who did come up in the ranks at Whole Foods as a cheesemonger from behind the counter, I don't think that they necessarily, places like that, I don't think that they have the capabilities to have the people who really care behind the counter anymore. So unless they want to throw more money towards labor, you just can't really have people who can spend that time and energy doing it. So I think that there's going to be, in my opinion, I think there's going to be a pulling back of grocery store cheese counters like that and more of the pre-cut stuff. But I think that our more independent shops and smaller shops are going to be able to be more successful because they have more qualified people to answer the questions and be there to talk about the taste and the flavor profile and the romance, the story, all of that stuff. Because people are going to be wanting that, but they also want the convenience of like, oh, I can just stop in and grab it, or I can go to this place and learn about it.
I mean, being able to taste before you buy is so important. I mean, if I were going to having a dinner party and I was going to, I'm going to go spend $60 on cheese, I want to taste it first. I think if we could buy our wine like that, that's the ideal.
I mean, Trader Joe's, they still sell a ton of cheese there and people do not taste anything like that. And there's nobody selling that cheese there, but people still go in and buy it. Yeah. And it's all by word of mouth on social media at this point. Yeah. I mean, there's like tons of like TikToks of like, here's the cheeses that I buy at Trader Joe's. So that's definitely a thing for sure. All right. Second point.
Yeah. These prepackaged cheese boards. So all of us, I mean, if you had any kind of website, and we have a pretty bare bones one, but got a bump in action last year, and we sustained it this year. We haven't really invested in it. We kind of think of it as an outlet just for people who don't live close enough to a cheese shop, to get our cheese. But it's made me now, more action on the website. I'm looking around a lot more, starting to think more about people buying cheese, having it sent to their houses. Clearly, it's the way people are buying most things. And some of the stuff I've been reading has said, industry experts expect that by 2025, 20% of grocery dollars will be spent online. I think it's currently last year maybe it was 5 or something. So anyway, it's going to grow rapidly. What's that going to mean for cheese? I don't know. Is it going to be small producers like us sending it to people's houses? We are not going to be as efficient packing and shipping cheese as distributors or Whole Foods through Amazon. So some big questions there. But what I brought up is an interesting thing I just started seeing. And I almost ordered one. I haven't done it. A cheese board, everything cut up, olives, meat, cheese, vac sealed, overnighted to you or sent by a 2-day. And the one I was looking at was Marissa's 7 to 10 day shelf life. So, those of us who handle these products, all these questions are going off like, well, how close is the olive to the meat, to the cheese? Like, is it getting wet? Is it getting interesting? I mean, it's how easy are we going to make it for people to serve our products? That's about as easy as it gets. Is it gonna? Does it have legs? Is the quality there? I don't know. 7 to 10 days. Anyway, I think that's interesting. I've seen some other producers doing it for pickup. And obviously shops, I mean, it's a big deal, right? For independent shops, platters. Are we going to start sending those around the country?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's also just a lot of companies that have started up over the pandemic, like charcuterie board, cheese board companies have just popped up left and right everywhere. But the vac sealed ones are definitely an interesting side effect, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, third point that you had. I don't remember what it was now,
I
but
don't remember what it was either. Um, consolidation of distributors.
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, boy, I mean, every industry for a couple of centuries now, probably cries foul when these trends happen, which they always do, of consolidation. And so I don't want to do that in a knee-jerk way. I mean, I run a business, I can understand there are some efficiencies of scale, and distribution is maybe not all about efficiency, but a large part of it is about those margins are tight, and you've got to be efficient. You want to be moving full trucks. I mean, I understand all that. What's at risk when these small regional distributors are purchased by large national distributors? So that one hits close to home for you guys, I know, with Provista. Here in the Midwest, classic provisions, similar history to Provista, started by a chef 20 years ago. Sally Witham, fantastic lady, sold to Fortune 2 years ago. Fortune also just bought Nesvig's. They might have been a 100-year-old family business here in Wisconsin, mostly meat centered. GFI just bought Anyata.
I did not know that.
Bob and Martina started at Benissimo. They had a cheese shop first, and then so I have a lot. All the names I just listed are customers of ours, good customers, the buyers and the sellers. So, as far as selfishly, I expect the transitions to be smooth, and but it just makes me stop and wonder. And we all ask the same thing when small cheese producers are incorporated into larger businesses. What's being gained here? Is anything being lost? I don't know. I haven't.
I don't know that there is an answer, but I think that after the last 2 years and watching our supply chain systems break down in pretty major ways, it's kind of scary to have like everything kind of in the same, all of the eggs in the same baskets. I feel like being able to diversify and having those smaller distributors has been kind of what helped things along. At least in the Pacific Northwest, I know that when we couldn't get flour and things like that at the grocery store, there were smaller companies that were kind of taking hold, and we were still able to order tons of stuff from like CSAs and whatnot, because they were able to kind of flip on a dime a little bit faster and get food to people. So yeah, there is something to be said about being a little bit scared of seeing all of this big consolidation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I suppose as a producer, it makes you nervous to have too much of your revenue beholden to one or two or a few accounts. But it's up to each producer to manage that issue. Our local co-op here has a comments section in the beginning, and it's people, exactly what it's like. People just throwing little fits about the bulk bins, and anyway, there was one the other day. Somebody was complaining about it was recent, so it was like maybe December. Some of the apples were from, I can't remember if it was Australia, New
Washington.
Yeah, they were from another continent. And somebody's like, what the hell? We've got local growers who have plenty of apples on hand right now. And the produce buyer responded by saying, yes, we agree, and we do have some of these local apples. But anyway, it's more energy consumptive to store these local apples through a growing season locally, truck them around on these little trucks. When you grow apples in bulk somewhere else, ship them on a container in bulk, move them in a full semi. And anyway, not that is the number one priority for food, if being efficient. But my point is, scale matters and efficiency matters. And if some of that comes with size, then maybe that's something we all can benefit from. But
all right, I got 3 last questions. How I finish things off. First one, current cheese crush.
Blakesville, the new goat cheese producer here in Wisconsin. Lake Effect.
I got to enjoy some with Aaron when I was in Minneapolis, and it was delightful. Your favorite cheese pairing?
Stitchelton or Colson Bassett Stilton with almond crackers, fig paste, and Royal Tokaj, the Hungarian wine. That's Christmas every year at our house. So that's fresh in my mind.
I like that. It's a little different than I was expecting you to say port because, that's the classic. But I like that you switched it up. Top food memory. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about like eating food, but just,
Yeah, this is another one fresh in my mind from the holidays. It's my dad making fondue with my dad. My parents, I ate a lot of fondue when I was a little kid, and they had lived in France and Switzerland a little bit, and so I was in love with Alpine cheese from being a little kid. I used to, sit there at the countertop when my dad was chunking up like Gruyere and Appenzeller, and then you'd get the bit like and chew on the rind. And still, when I chew under like Pleasant Ridge rinds, it reminds me of that. Anyway, now he's making fondue with my kids. They're like old enough to, wield a knife and like learn how to do it. So that's we probably had fondue 3 times in the last week.
That's delightful.
I associate it with this time of year, and feels good always.
Well, thank you, Andy, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk with me.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me. Always an easy yes.
I'm always grateful for the opportunity for Andy's time, and I'm happy to share this conversation with y'all. I hope you learned just as much as I did. This podcast is recorded, produced, and edited by me, Janae Muha. Thank you to Ben Muha for allowing me to use your music. Follow along on my cheesy adventures at Instagram, Facebook, or get more content at Patreon. My website is also a great hub for all of my goings-on. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep spreading the word of good curd.